Welcome everyone to the second session of our second edition of Love is Political, Literary Circles for Liberation. This time we will be, of course, we are already reading Olga Segura's Birth of a Movement book, Black Lives Matter and the Catholic Church. During our first gathering, our first session, I did a land acknowledgement, but I really want to remind us that we need to acknowledge and honor with gratitude the land and waterways and the indigenous people, past and present, who have stewarded Turtle Island, a territory that, of course, now includes and is currently known as the United States. We recognize and uplift the understanding that much of this land continues to be unceded and that many indigenous peoples' nations currently lack federal recognition. I am myself and Ino and Okinichi peoples land. They inhabited this land and continue inhabiting this land, this region. And I encourage you to look for the names of the indigenous people in your own communities because they are around you and we need to be in community with them while we do the work for liberation, collective liberation. And I'm going to introduce myself. I'm Roxana Bendesu. I use she, her pronouns. I was born and raised for the most part in Lima. My ancestors are the Quechuas from the Andes of Peru. And I'm really excited about being here with y'all to learn about this amazing book that Olga Segura has written. But first I'd like to invite Arthur, who's going to read a prayer for us.
O Holy One, let us answer the call to fly with you. Again, fill the hearts of your faithful. Let us embrace this call to community with you and one another, with those with whom we disagree, those with whom we disagree. Let us learn from those who have brought opposites to dialogue. Let us pray, study, and act in gratitude with Olga Segura, the prophets, the Barragans. Let us use the gifts of this Pax Christi community to articulate the message needed by our leaders. As Olga has said, let us not wait to make your word flesh in your justice, peace, and compassion. Let us speak the words of a history avoided. Let us together compose the pastoral letters and share the message that will bridge towards justice, peace, and compassion. Teach us the way to fly with you, and together let us make the word flesh.
Amen.
Amen.
It was really exciting to hear your words, Arthur, because I know that you took some time to put this together, especially for today. And we're so very thankful for this work, this beautiful piece that you've created for us. And so now, as we did last time, I would like us to read together, and I'm going to call on volunteers, or ask for volunteers rather, to read part of our statement of principles, which is right here. And it will start with a liberating vision. And I will ask for volunteers here because I really believe that we should read this collectively. And so maybe someone who hasn't yet read, if anybody would like to read this time, we can start here. You can unmute yourself.
I could begin. Hi, I'm Linda. Statement of Principles, Elections 2020, a liberating vision. Our commitment to follow in the footsteps and example of Jesus, born to a people suffering oppression, forced to cross borders as a refugee, devoted to supporting the struggles of marginalized peoples, persecuted and violently killed by the ruling empire. guides our discernment of the current signs of the times, and leads us to affirm the following.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Who would like to go next?
I will. My name is Donna. Land Acknowledgement. Pax Christi USA wishes to acknowledge and honor with gratitude the land and waterways and the indigenous peoples, past and present, who have stewarded Turtle Island, a territory that includes what is currently known as the United States of America. We recognize and uplift the understanding that much of this land continues to be unceded, and that many indigenous peoples' nations currently lack federal recognition.
Thank you. And who would like to go next?
I'll read. Acknowledgement of the legacy of slavery. Pax Christi USA wishes to acknowledge the despicable actions of the transatlantic slave trade that paved the way to current anti-Black racism. The labor of enslaved African people built the physical structures and generated the wealth still enjoyed by many of this country's institutions and families. We recognize that while many Catholics were abolitionists, still others profited from this shameful practice, and while people continue to benefit from its legacies to this day.
Thank you. And there's another acknowledgement here. Who would like to read? And you can just unmute yourself.
Want me to?
Oh, go ahead, Catherine.
I mean, somebody else? Oh, okay. Acknowledgement of the role of the Catholic Church. Pax Christi USA wishes to acknowledge and repent for the role of the institution of the Catholic Church in the process of colonization and its complicity in the sins of anti-Black racism, enslavement, and segregation. We commit ourselves to follow the leadership of Black, Indigenous, and other communities of color, including those within the church, and to support them with intention, time, and money in the struggle for collective liberation.
Thank you. And so because of the topic today, I would also like us to read the next one on racial justice. Who would like to read it?
I could do that.
Okay.
Kathy Gribble. On racial justice. Racism penetrates every aspect of life in the United States, seeding the terror that continually threatens and kills people of color while perpetrating white supremacy and leaving all of humanity disfigured. The historical reality, readily apparent in policing, the prison system, education, and highlighted in the racial inequities heightened during the pandemic, indicts our society as one in which Black lives have not mattered. We assert that Black lives matter and that the violence inherent in systemic racism is an affront to the God who creates, redeems, and sanctifies all, and calls us together as one family. As a community of conscience, we stand together and fully support the divestment of resources away from policing and toward education, healthcare, and community investment designed to serve people. We support reparations for the suffering inflicted on Black people because of slavery, Jim Crow laws, and targeted mass incarceration, especially in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Thank you for reading that. Oof. Well, so again, I would like us to take a second to breathe all this in together. And so we're going to breathe in and breathe out 3 times. Breathe in. And breathe out. Remember every paragraph that we just read. And breathe in. And breathe out all the things that you want to let go of, all the false understandings that we've been fed with. And let's breathe in again truth, historical facts. And let's breathe out any doubt that we cannot do better. We can. And we're doing it. We're taking steps to do that. And that's why we're here. And we today have the honor to be with Leslie Colvin. Leslie is a Catholic laywoman and a writer. She is a communications coordinator for the Catholic Committee of the South's Gathering for Mission and on the editorial team for the Center of Action and Contemplation's Daily Meditations. She has been interviewed by American Magazine and Vatican Radio on the construct of race. She's also a longtime member of Pax Christi, instrumental in the national conference that happened in Atlanta in 2013. And I'm reading actually from a bio that I already had with me. I hope everything's still accurate and it's not in past tense. But so I want to welcome Leslie to this conversation. Let me spotlight you right here. And there we go. First of all, I think the question is how are your heart and your spirit?
Thank you, Roxana, for the introduction. Yes, everything is current still. It's good to be with Pax Christi tonight. I was here 2 weeks ago, and so grateful to have been invited to speak tonight. My heart and my spirit are hopeful, but bruised. I'm a child of the 1960s. I'm a native and resident of Alabama. And so in addition to dealing with the structures we have that promote racism and white body supremacy, and then for so much pain to be raw from what we've witnessed the last year and a half, actually more than that. It's challenging. Life itself is challenging. Last summer, after the murder of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor, I experienced in my body a feeling that actually I had never been able to verbalize, but it was a feeling I experienced in childhood during the civil rights movement, one of hope, one of not understanding how racism could be permitted to reign. And that feeling, the hope and the tension of that I experienced as a child would literally return to my body last summer. And it was a surprise, but it triggered so much. And I'm 62. I don't have children to whom I, can share what I've learned. So I was inspired to begin writing again. And I started a blog last summer in which I spoke of my hopes and my woundings within our society, within our church. And when the pandemic happened, it was so apparent to me, the pandemic of COVID-19, it was so apparent to me in the racial disparities, or the number of people who were contracting the disease and the number of people who were dying, who were in Black and brown bodies. It's kind of that COVID-19 was a pandemic in itself, and then it revealed, kind of like the Wizard of Oz, it revealed the little man behind the curtain, of racism and white supremacy, and you recognize how much work has been done, but how so much more has to be done. And so I think recognizing, my own mortality, and that I don't have children to leave teachings to, just needing to get the words out. And I did that through writing and speaking from my lived experience as an African American Catholic woman in the United States.
Yeah. Well, I empathize with you in some aspect, as in being a woman of color who doesn't have children, but really thinking about this, the sense of wanting to, I guess the idea of like, what's my legacy, right? And I think in a big way, our work, our writings, that's our legacy, right? Like that's the way that we pass our stories to the next generation. So I really recognize how important that is for, of course, the next generation and ourselves to have that feeling of nourishing in a way, in a different way. And honestly, even being here with this group, even though of course there are no children here, but it is a way to nourish our world, right? To construct this world that will be better for the next generation, right? Hopefully.
Exactly. And I'm hoping that the words that I share, I don't want them to, I'm not talking about, impacting the people who are children now grow up, but I'm hoping that they'll have an impact on people who are adults now, and that they invite, no, that's too gentle, that they compel people to recognize the horrendous nature of this evil, how massive it is, how complex and multifaceted it is, and that whatever discomfort someone may feel, in learning or in growing in their understanding,
Mhm.
that discomfort is their gateway to transformation. That's what Christ calls us, to new ways of understanding, new ways of being.
Mhm.
And I often say that, as a child, we have part of the American culture is Santa Claus for Christmas. And at some point before adulthood, we have to accept that Santa Claus is not the reason for Christmas. It's not about how many gifts are under the tree for me, but it's about God's profound love for us, that God would choose to become human and experience life as a human and enter the human condition as an infant in a people who were oppressed. If that is not God going to the margins, then what is? And then to proclaim this message of liberation that goes back to the Hebrew scriptures, when the Black church hears the story of Moses going to Pharaoh at God's command and saying, "Free my people," that story is very personal for me as an African American Catholic, as it is for other African Americans who are Christians. I mean, that's God's call for liberation. And it is beyond me that people who claim to believe in the God of Jesus Christ would whitewash the gospel so that it is not recognizable. We have a lot of work to do if we profess faith in Jesus Christ.
Yeah. And I guess to add to that, whitewash to a level where the gospel is being used to do the complete opposite.
Yeah. I mean, when you look at the role of countries that had large Catholic populations at the beginning of the transatlantic slave trade, in particular Spain and Portugal, these are people who supposedly share the same faith that I do. And they decided to deny the humanity of my ancestors on the African continent for the economic gain of the crown they served.
Mm-hmm.
And then for my ancestors who did not drown or die while stashed in the belly of a ship, but who survived that voyage, that you would then claim to teach them about the love of God and Jesus Christ while denying their dignity, their freedom by holding them as property.
Mm-hmm.
I attended a conference a few years ago, and I usually don't remember what people say. But Reverend Angel Kyoto Williams is a Buddhist leader. She's also African American. And in one of her talks, she asked a question that still gives me goosebumps while also piercing me at my core. And the question was, what would the white mother of a 12-year-old son say to herself when she saw an African child being sold into slavery? What lies would she tell herself to allow her to accept the system? And then what lies are told to the child? And so that's how that's what led us to here. That's what led us to the Black Lives Matter movement.
Mm-hmm.
That's what led us to the civil rights movement of my childhood. That's, it's kind of like a snowball that keeps going. It's like, okay, we need to melt the snowball. We don't need this snowball that is picked up so much garbage and debris that it has a stench.
Mm-hmm.
And we can't pretend that it doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
Because everybody's aware of the stench. I'm sorry. I feel like I got a little too emotional with that one.
No, I always say, don't apologize for feelings, because that's exactly where we need to be. When we talk about our own experiences, our own lived experiences, and, these conversations may make some people feel uncomfortable. And like we said at the beginning of the session, the first session, that's what, many people are going to experience. And it's okay, right? It's okay, like you mentioned, to feel that lack of comfort, because we need to grapple with this. We need to hear it, and we need to hear it firsthand. We really need to center Black voices that can talk about their own experiences. We don't need any type of experts that are, you know, outsiders of the community, but we need people who have lived through it and who feel, not just look at numbers, right? They feel it, and they get, you know, sad, but also angry, and also feel hope, right? And so all these different feelings. So I just want to honor all the feelings that are coming up for you right now.
Thank you. You know, I say that turning away from the discomfort or ignoring the stench is a luxury I can't afford. You know, at this age, I recognize that these problems will not be resolved in my lifetime.
Mm.
You know, as a child in the civil rights movement, you know, it's there was so much hope, and there is still hope, but it's from gaining a broader perspective of how deep and complex this problem is. You know, okay, I am not a sports person by any stretch of the imagination. I don't know how I came into my family, but I'm the oddball. However, I have great respect for Colin Kaepernick.
Mm.
And I was so angered when people were complaining about him kneeling during the national anthem. And it's kind of, when we speak our truth from our lived experience, when we say we are in pain because of injustice, there is always someone there to say, oh no, this is not the time. This is not the place. This is not the manner for you to do it. You know, in 1960, everybody was not celebrating Martin Luther King. Even when he was assassinated, everybody was still not. And guess what? Everybody is still not accepting Martin Luther King. Okay? They may not be as vocal, but there are still those who object to his work. And so with Colin Kaepernick, having the courage and conviction to kneel during the national anthem and realizing what he was putting on the line. You know, he knew he was putting his career on the line. He was also putting his life on the line because too many people have been killed for protesting injustice. Medgar Evers is the first that comes to mind. And Kaepernick was trying to bring attention to injustice within the NFL.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, not NFL, I'm sorry. He was trying to bring attention to injustice within society. And what we have found out within the last week is that the NFL had an unjust system for speaking or acknowledging the abilities of African American players. I mean, so for African American players who go and say that they are suffering because of injuries to their brain, and then being told, well, you already started out at a lower place on the scale because you're Black. I mean, that's what came out within the past week. Who would have thought of that? You know, I mean, you see the disparities in the numbers, but then to recognize how far it goes to perpetuate the lies, to perpetuate unjust systems.
You know, and that reminds me of one of the passages that we read in one of the 2 chapters about how, you know, the sports people and the entertainers are welcome to, you know, spaces, but then not their humanity, right? So come entertain us, but leave your humanity out.
Exactly. Exactly.
And, you know, Olga Segura has touched on so many things in only the first 2 chapters. I'm really looking forward for everybody to, you know, go into their small groups and really talk about this. But I want to ask you about your own experience with Olga, because I know that you had a connection at some point. Would you tell us a little bit about it?
Okay. In 2018, I had the privilege of going to Rome, which was just an amazing experience for me with Catholic Women Speak, which is an international group of Catholic women. And we were in Rome for the launch of our 2nd book. And we had a symposium. And during my time in Rome, I was interviewed by Vatican Radio, which just knocked my socks off. And when I got home, I shared the interview, I think, on Twitter. And Olga reached out to me. And at the time, she was writing her piece for America Magazine on Black Lives Matter. And so Olga reached out to me and interviewed me for the article that led to the book. And so I am so happy and proud of the work that she is doing. It is just, I mean, she's unfolding beautifully. And I am so excited for her. And I'm so grateful for her having received the offer to write a book on Black Lives Matter in the church. I mean, I think her book, there are parts of it that will pierce, you know, that pierce the heart. Like the beginning of chapter 1. I had just finished, I reread that last night, and I'd been doing some work on Emmett Till, and I started reading it last night, and it was the same feelings that come. You know, it's our bodies hold this. And I am grateful that Olga has been given an opportunity and that she is using that to elevate voices from the margins.
One of the things you actually mentioned before related to some stuff that she mentioned, which was race-based trauma, in you know, really acknowledging that there is this trauma that people carry because of that is based on the racism, right? Like, do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
You know, it's easy to understand in today's society that children who grow up in abusive homes experience trauma.
Mm.
Unless they are able to work through their trauma, they will unknowingly transfer it to their children. Even in not trying to address it. It is there. When we speak of the transatlantic slave trade, and then we talk about the end of chattel slavery, but we move on to other forms of injustice that are based on this flawed construct of race. It's throughout the system, the society. And people recognize a need to protect the children. And sometimes in trying to protect, they're also transferring the woundings that they experienced.
Mm.
I heard Bishop Edward Braxton speak about Emmett Till's murder. And I don't remember his age. He was a young boy when Emmett Till was murdered. And he was told as a child not to go to the South. This is what they do to us down there. And so years later, even as an adult, coming to the South, he had that voice of not going to the South because this is what they do. And so, and the reality is now, as we know, that it's not confined to the South. You know, this flawed construct of race is what I say, it is from sea to shining sea.
Mm-hmm.
And the trauma that people hold from generation to generation. So it's not just like you have one family with one, you know, one child growing up in an abusive family, but it's as if you have the abuse within the society.
Mm-hmm.
And that there is really no one that can protect you from that. John Lewis's hometown is about 50 miles from where I am. And I wrote a piece following his death. And I talk about how there would have been some shared experience based on the fact that we grew up in the same region. And leaving the house and elders saying, be careful. And it's another way of saying, I love you.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that when you walk out of the door of this house,
Mm-hmm.
that something unforeseen may happen. Mm-hmm. And so even that act of being on guard comes from that, you know, you're constantly needing to be on guard.
And then to see people, you know, wonder where this is coming from, and understanding that the reality is that many people haven't really heard the history of, you know, this region of the world. They haven't really heard a lot of the details that come with that, and instead have learned what I call myths about the formation of the country, and they use terminology that implies perfection and beacon and and all these things, fathers and whatnot, that to me it is very insulting, honestly, because if you just at this point Google history of the US, like you can find it. Why are we continuing to use these narratives that are obviously false and are obviously racist and are obviously geared towards white supremacy? Like, why are we doing this?
So so I think now everybody knows about the massacre that happened in Oklahoma 100 years ago in Tulsa with the Greenwood community. Last week, I was shocked to find out that, and I learned this through the Equal Justice Initiative that is run by Brian Stevenson. November 3rd, 1874, there was a massacre in Eufaula, Alabama, which is 50 miles from me. If anyone is driven from Atlanta to go to the Gulf Coast, the Panhandle of Florida, you go through Eufaula, and you see it's such a nice, pretty little town, with these huge, massive trees. And as a child, when we would travel, we traveled by car a lot. And the question would always be asked by the elders, if trees could talk. And so I have found out within the last week, that where there is a Confederate memorial in Eufaula was the site of a massacre of African Americans in 1874. My family has lived in Alabama for generations. I never heard about this happening in 1874.
It's so clear that there is an intentionality on hiding these facts, right? It's just so clear. But books like this of Olga really bring me hope, because this is a person who's trying to shine a light on history, on connecting the dots, on let's recognize what was the role of the Catholic Church. It doesn't mean that you are rejecting Jesus. No, on the contrary, actually you're sort of reclaiming Jesus in a way.
Exactly, reclaiming Jesus and reclaiming the gospel. Going to the margins. My favorite line, this is on page 36. And Olga is talking about the founders of Black Lives Matter. And she says that they are showing us what it truly means to fight for the most marginalized groups in our society, what it means to truly care about human life, and what it means to truly imagine a better and more Christ-like world. Unlike the church I love. Isn't that powerful?
Yeah.
Unlike the church I love, these women are not afraid to demand a world free from sexism, misogyny, and environments in which men are centered.
And I know she meant, of course, the institution of the church, the head of the institution in many parts of the world, but speaking of the US, of course. But I do have to say, and I always try to remember this, that we are all the church, right? We are also organizing. We are also in our communities trying to support the movement for Black lives. We are taking steps to, make things a little better, at least with whatever we can do, whatever small role we can take. I always say any role is a great role, even if it's what others would consider a small role. It's a great role because we need them all.
Well, and we never know how God will utilize that role. You know, each of us has to use our voice and give voice to the gospel of Christ. And there's so many who think that change can only come from the top down. I disagree. Jesus was born an infant of an oppressed people. I mean, how much lower to the bottom can you get? Hello?
Exactly.
And I believe that with each of us using our voice and standing together, that it's inevitable for the powers that be to continue when we are united and when we don't allow them to divide us, when we don't allow them to distort the truth of what we're saying. When the first Africans were kidnapped on the African continent, there was a scream, a gut-wrenching scream from mothers who would never see their children, for families that were broken. That scream continues. It's beyond time and space. It crossed the Atlantic. It was a scream of those in the belly of ships. It was the cry of those in bondage who were not allowed to scream. Those who could only shed silent tears. But it's the same cry. It's the cry that was offered by the abolitionists, the Reconstructionists, those who experienced Jim Crow. It's the cry of civil rights movement, and it continues today in Black Lives Matter.
Thank you, Leslie. I want to add that there, women like yourself also were the leaders of resistance, even in these boats as well. And there's some more history coming out about that. And I'm really excited for us to continue listening to voices like yours. I'm so honored that you were here and came with, just an open heart and just very vulnerable to share how you feel and get people to listen to what you have to say. Let's thank Leslie for an amazing conversation. We can all unmute ourselves and thank her.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Leslie.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie.
Thank you, Leslie.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So I'm really excited about all your having conversations. I'm really curious though about what has been the discussion. So obviously we don't have time for everyone to do a report back, but what we could do is similar to what we did last week, perhaps, and get people to just say a word or a line about your discussions. And you just have to unmute yourselves, and just say it. And then we'll go to the next one.
Waking up.
Mhm.
Challenging.
Interesting.
Challenging.
Calling
Kevin?
out. Insightful.
Persistent.
Grateful for Leslie's work with us in fleshing the work of the book.
Strength and community.
Finding your voice through trauma.
Vulnerability.
Becoming aware.
Power of education.
The warmth of the conversation.
Where do we go from here?
3 people in our group and each coming from very different perspectives.
Empowering the bishops to justice.
Well, and I want to heed Roxana's word that we are the church and empower us to justice.
Don't wait for the bishops.
Say that again, Kathy?
Don't wait for the bishops.
Don't wait for the bishops.
Move forward.
And who else was going? I think we missed that.
The collective versus the individual, the primacy of the collective over the individual.
And we talked about the power of Pax Christi to be a unified voice in all that we're talking about tonight, and perhaps make a strong statement about that, maybe at the conference, in July.
We are the church, but the bishops are the one with the power. So how do we, get through to them? Yeah, we are the church, but we have our local parish priest hardly has any power at all. It all begins with the bishops. So what is it de facto? What kind of power is that really? And how do we use it if we do have it?
Yes.
Is it possible that we give them the power they have?
Even the Pope is having trouble with the bishop.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Follow the Pope, not the bishops.
So train yourself in ways to be an activist and be engaged in the process. Learn, get skills that you need to write letters to the editor, write letters to your archbishop, and bring people together in anti-racist circles, and do what you can where you are. And the other thing I'd like to say is, and this is a challenge to all white people there, and something that a friend of mine shared a long time ago, which is that when white people's hearts are as broken as Black people's are around racism, that's when action really, really begins to happen. So please let your heart be broken.
Good.
And we have a document where we're trying to gather all these various, reflections and resources that we're finding collectively. I'm going to paste that link into the chat, and I would love for you to keep, add all the resources that you want to add there for others to learn more outside of this group, and to share it with others, and perhaps start your own groups within our Pax Christi family, so others can join you. It doesn't have to come, and this is actually a reflection of how we can wait for the hierarchy to act, right? We have to act ourselves as well and organize ourselves. And so how are we putting together our own literary circles to keep learning about what's happening in our communities, to keep transforming our narratives and moving away from narratives that are no longer helpful and have never been helpful for many. So all this work that needs to be done has to come from us. So really, when you think about the structure of Pax Christi USA, we want you to understand that you are at the top and we are here to serve you. And so if you want to start your own groups to do literary circles, we would love to promote them. We would love to share them with the rest of the membership, and take initiative. If you want to join with your local Black Lives Matter chapter, do it. And we're here to support you and to amplify your message from the local, from the grassroots level to the national level, and hopefully the international level as well. That's why this structure exists. And that's why we strive to be that spiritual and political home. This is it for this session. We will see you in 2 weeks for our third session. And then we'll have, 2 more. And so we're really looking forward to join with y'all again in 2 weeks. See you then.